How many do we do a year now? 600, man. We are a meeting machine. But we're not just putting on meetings, we also are an information clearinghouse for folks. Now, the China Environment Forum, which I direct, we focus solely on China, but on the big issue of issues of energy and environment. And very much we see ourselves as serving the professionals in the field globally, not only through meetings and publications, but also I do a lot of informal matchmaking. I wear the little yenta kind of scarf periodically. Yeah, 10 years I've been here. And I often celebrate meeting days because it means I'm not sitting in front of the computer fundraising, or, which I like too. But I also like meeting days because it helps me connect with people who are working in the field. And I particularly like meetings on energy because, as you'll see, we're still filling up. But energy meetings tend to have people hanging off the rafters. You say China energy, and people think climate, and particularly now an extremely timely issue, right? Copenhagen. Coming down the pike, China a key player. But also I think for those of us who are living in D.C., I have an excitement about U.S.-China energy cooperation because under the Obama administration, this kind of cooperation has been put back as a priority. And we have Stephen Chu, who's been crafting and working with his Chinese counterparts, a lot of new agreements, a lot of good potential. Now, of course, that those of you who come to my meetings a lot know that the U.S. NGO community has long been very active working on energy issues in China. And in fact, this month, besides today's meeting, we have 3 meetings coming up this month on energy. Just to work backwards, on the 16th, we will have NRDC and Lawrence Berkeley National Lab talking about energy efficiency, activities in China and translating those gains to greenhouse gas reductions. On October 6th, working backwards, we have a meeting on China and climate security with some analysts looking both at the security angle and impacts on society. And then today, in the present moment where you should always be, we are looking at 3 very interesting people who are working in China who are going to be talking about some of engaging China in new energy cooperation. Another reason why, today's meeting, I think, is kind of setting an interesting ambiance for it is, I don't know if you kind of read the New York Times, that guy Tom Friedman. Anyone read his op-ed on Monday? Which was really intriguing, saying that, China's green revolution is a Sputnik moment for the United States. We're behind, he says. Kind of almost like a win-lose. So he's kind of throwing down the gauntlet to the U.S. saying, like, what are you going to do about it? But I actually think that those of us, the people in the China Environment Forum network, and I would gather that the people on this panel probably don't see it as a win-lose. Rather, you are working there are big opportunities for working with China on energy, not only for the business community and helping our own, nudging our own economy towards low-carbon development. China and U.S. probably need to do that together. But also that, it matters for the world. So, who are these people? You have their bios. And you started a couple minutes late, so I'm just going to touch on, we've got 3 speakers. And they're going to give us some updates on some new energy policy innovations and projects in China that they've been either involved in or observing. We've got 2 people from JUCCCE. It's not JUCCCE, okay? JUCCCE. All right? We want to practice this later on. That JUCCCE, Joint U.S.-China Cooperation on Clean Energy, is a relatively new NGO working in China, and they've been doing, but they've been starting to do some on-the-ground work, mayoral trainings, and so they kind of talk about, and did I say your name wrong? Yeah, Papermaster. I speak German. I said Papermeister is what I was trying to say. Papermaster are going to talk about some of what, kind of what JUCCCE is. I've never had them speak before, and some of their insights on trends. Then we have David Mohler, who is Senior Vice President and Chief Technology Officer for Duke Energy. He's responsible for development and application of technologies supporting Duke Energy's strategic objectives, and he's been doing stuff in China.
Yes.
And we're very intrigued with that. Because when people told me, I said, Duke Energy's coming, like, why is Duke Energy in China? So our big question is, like, he's going to tell us why they're in China. And somehow he has time in all this
it's really for the food.
Really for the... he also has time to be on a number of boards and advisory committees, GridPoint, Advanced Energy Corps. You can read the bio. You want to hear them talk, right? All right, now I'm going to stop talking now and invite Steve to kick us off. And I want to make sure, because they're all new to me, they should know I'm a very draconian chair. You get no more than 20 minutes, cut you off. Because we have an intelligent audience out here. There are quite a few people that work in the field already on energy and environment. They will have intelligent questions, right? Intelligent questions? Intelligent questions. I'm looking particularly at Steve, some people out there, that, and also have some of their own insights in their work. Okay, with no more ado, Steve, it's you.
Okay, well, good morning, and thank you for the introduction. My name is now Steve Papermaster, I think.
Got a nice ring to it.
Yeah, which is actually okay, because that is part of the origin of the last name. It actually was more Papermaster, and in the days when what is Eastern Germany and Lithuania kind of ran together, and the Papermaster ancestors came over. So, you know, history is an important element when we talk about China, when we talk about energy policy overall. And I'll share with you some perspectives on JUCCCE, on joint U.S.-China collaboration on clean energy before Peggy takes over. I want to share a little bit of perspective, perhaps, to do some stage setting. This will not take more than 20 minutes, because I really don't want to
right here.
do the, you know, this chop here. So a little bit of background. From my standpoint, I've been involved with energy policy for quite a long time in both public and private initiatives. I chair the Energy Committee for PCAS, President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology, through both terms of the Bush administration, and have been active through the Obama administration in a lot of ongoing activities as well with the current advisors and PCAS. As well, have been involved with energy industry, both funding as a venture capitalist, as an entrepreneur, in many what we would call green technology initiatives. A few years ago, we didn't call those green technology initiatives. We just called them energy investments, or new energy investments, or clean technology. So, a few kind of key principles, I would say. First of all of you have a deep interest in energy. And I'm sure a lot of very strong backgrounds. But energy is a very complex arena. In my experience, no matter how many years you spend in and around energy policy or energy from a hands-on standpoint, you realize it's a very complex environment, very complex set of issues, and it really is hard to break it down to just a few basic fundamentals. You're dealing with a lot of physical properties. You're dealing with a lot of geology, you're dealing with a lot of biology, you're dealing with a lot of science, technology, economics, a lot of politics, a lot of policy. And when you put all those together in the hands of even the world's greatest experts, it doesn't mean that you have agreement. I've held and been part of testimonies and hearings of multiple Nobel laureates where there is vigorous debate around very fundamental issues, and the debate ends with no agreement. And this is the nature of energy. It's the nature of energy policy. It's the nature of energy, period. The other observation I'll share is that there is a constant dynamic tension between immediacy, the sense of urgency, which is a good thing relative to solving climate change problems, solving environmental issues, solving energy issues, solving major problems, both on a regional, local basis and on a global basis. So that sense of urgency, that immediacy, is juxtaposed with the fact that there are a lot of things having to do with energy that are very long-term. And they are long-term whether people want them to be long-term or not. They can wish that they were not long-term. It would be nice to think that there were ways to move off of carbon, if you will, in just a few years of a burst of incredible creative innovation. But fundamentally, putting our reality check hat on, we're dealing with decades and decades and decades ahead, where we have a very large carbon footprint in all forms of energy, coal, oil, natural gas, and other forms. So, this is really, when you talk about China, when we think about China, we're thinking about it in that context. China is a very, very large country, both obviously in terms of population, resources, and resource needs. It is a study in that contrast there's an incredible sense of urgency. Things are developing there on a pace unseen in most parts of the world, both in and out of recessionary times. And at the same time, it is clearly a country that has an incredible heritage and focus both on past, present, and future in a very long-term context. So everything having to do with energy in China is just like I just described, which is a dynamic tension between the need for immediacy and change and development, an urgency to meet short-term needs where the demands are constantly outstripping the supply capabilities because of the rapid maturation and development and growth of the country and the economy. And at the same time, there is dramatic focus on long-term because these are not issues, even with the most brilliant minds, the best technologists, the best engineers, the best policymakers in China and in the world that are going to get solved for the long term overnight. Okay? Now, perhaps someday in a few decades, magically, all the major goals will have been achieved and something will be declared an overnight success, because that tends to be what happens with overnight successes, that after decades and decades of hard work, something hits a tipping point and becomes an overnight success. So JUCCCE was formed a little over 2 years ago out of this dynamic tension of innovation and sense of urgency and the focus on now, as well as the need for long-term development capability. It was formed out of a very strong agreement among a lot of both policymakers from the U.S. and from China, from advisors from the academic community, from MIT and Beijing University, Tsinghua University, and many other institutions, from government leaders, from private sector leaders, from venture capitalists, from investors, from entrepreneurs on all sides. And it came out of a very short burst of intense meetings that we held in the spring of 2007, and out of that, against the backdrop of an ambitious agenda for the strategic economic dialogue that was ongoing, for the Asia-Pacific Partnership that was in launch and in formation, and a number of other industry initiatives, trade missions and economic missions, et cetera. So the formation of JUCCCE was really focused on a very unique goal, which is to fill a fairly large gap, a large hole in the ecosystem, if you will, relative to the ability to provide a very dynamic network to pull together on a constant basis experts, private sector, public sector, executives, entrepreneurs, investors, academic as well, and policymakers, both from the U.S. and China, but as well many, many other parties who have great interest in China, and build out an organization as an NGO with very close relationships with both governments, and yet knowing the protocol issues that occur when you have pure government relationships, which can slow things down. They can, even with the best of intentions, take a lot longer than anticipated. We wanted JUCCCE to be entrepreneurial. We wanted JUCCCE to be an organization that could take advantage of and work in parallel with the government initiatives and yet move at a much faster pace, act as a catalyst, act as a network, act as an organization that's focused on very near-term goals in the context of long-term development. So JUCCCE was formed and launched in a matter of really hours, days, and weeks. In the last 2 years, I think you'll see, as Peggy shares further, what we have done with JUCCCE and what we are currently doing with JUCCCE, that this is an organization that stands out among most NGOs, most organizations, period, whether they're government or non-government, in its speed, in its efficiency, in its effectiveness, in its innovative nature, and its focus on results. And the results that have already been achieved in a very short period of time stack up to much larger organizations with much larger resources that in the same period of time of the last 2 years are still not out of the starting gates and are still really captivated in meetings talking about what could happen versus getting things done. So Copenhagen coming up, very important issues on the table. China being really a proxy for not only effective policy and innovation in clean technology and green energy, but also public policy. And again, like a lot of the issues we're touching on this morning, it's quite debatable and great cannon fodder for Friedman and for New York Times columnists and the like. Who's ahead, who's behind, everything like to get framed out in terms of a race. And of course, again, as I shared, we could fill this room with Nobel laureates. We may have some. If so, please join us up here.
They're better.
Absolutely, absolutely. But I guarantee we would not have agreement. And an agreement, in a sense, doesn't matter as long as tremendous progress is being made. Final note before turning this over to Peggy, I think that the business model, if you will, of JUCCCE, of this organization, is a model of an NGO in the era of the next generation, in the era of a generation of people who are raised on the internet, raised digitally, if you will, regardless of demographics, regardless of age group. We are dealing with a time of rapid change, the evolution of Web 2.0 technologies, the power of the internet, the power of the social media, the power to bridge gaps of language, time, distance, and accelerate the concept phase to execution phase of any worthy idea. And again, so the business model of JUCCCE, I think, is very important in that it is focused on that rapid execution of ideas to action. So out of this, I hope that you gain appreciation for what's going on in China. JUCCCE is a proxy and a great, I think, a great example and leading indicator for what has been done and what can be done that has the most scalable, high-impact results orientation in a very short period of time. And this is really what it takes to make the kind of impact on a measurable basis, beyond the rhetoric, beyond the politics, beyond the policy. If you don't get down to how do you do these things with scale rapidly, then it's all talk. So that's enough talk for me. I'm going to turn this over to Peggy Liu, my dear friend and partner, co-founder, and really the heartbeat behind JUCCCE. Peggy?
Okay, it's applause. I want to jump in because I was so rushed in the. I do want to note that chairperson here that also I didn't mention at the beginning that you have been honored as a Time Magazine 2008 Environmental Hero and World Economic Forum Young Global Leader. Woohoo! She's a high energy. Woo! She's a high energy person, neck and neck, whether who talks faster. Peggy
I'm not sure I'm as high energy as Jennifer, though.
So we'll see.
So we'll see. Thank you. That was a great lead into what we're doing. Hopefully today, what I'd like to do in a short period of time is tell you a little bit about our approach to making things happen in China, but also give you some food for thought for dialogue later, and give you some colorful pictures about what we're doing on the ground. So our goal is very, very simple, although very large. It's to change the way China creates and uses energy. And I like to tell people it's really, Steve is largely at fault for me working so hard over the last 3 years to pull together JUCCCE, but it's really been an Alice in Wonderland experience. Every single day we're able to work with some of the brightest minds and most passionate people, and we're all working towards the same cause, which is accelerating the greening of China. Our key differentiator is really international collaboration. So the ministries that work with us, whether it's the Ministry of Housing and Urban Rural Development or Ministry of Human Resources and Social Security or local governments like mayors in Yangzhou, they look to us because we give them solutions from around the world. We give them people. We give them access to financial resources. Our other differentiator, I believe, and this has really only become clearer to me in the last year, is that we're able to facilitate a lot of innovative thinking by bringing people to a physical table and really facilitating the dialogue, listening to them, and coming up with ideas that wouldn't ordinarily have come out in siloed spaces. So, for example, in our mayoral training program, where we train 50 mayors each session, this November 13th, I was able to get one of the top celebrities, Li Bingbing, for those of you who are Chinese, top grossing actor last year in China, to come and speak to 50 mayors about the importance of consumer education and talk about some of the student education that we're doing on energy saving. So I think this approach does make a huge difference because it allows us to tap into resources from different companies that wouldn't ordinarily have been able to put their resources towards impact in the energy sector. We have just opened up an office outside of our Shanghai and Beijing offices in Washington, D.C., so that's one of the reasons why I'm here, to make new friends. And I wanted to thank Duke Energy for their very, very generous support of that office, as well as being a friend and partner in understanding how to move forward, especially in the smart grid and coal spaces. So the way that JUCCCE started after we're sort of given this idea of changing the way China creates and uses energy is I actually went to McKinsey and asked them to give us some pro bono time. So they're very generous. The head of Asia, the head of China's energy practice, the head of the China practice, allowed us to take 8 people from different offices for 6 weeks. And we brought people to the tables, whether it's Rob Watson, the father of LEAD, or the GM of GM China, or VPs of Shenhua Coal doing clean energy, bringing them to the table and really talking about how do we do things at internet speed when we're faced with the next decade of sort of this crucial opportunity to mitigate. And I sort of gave them a goal, this criteria of what can we do that has milestones of 3 years or less. And when you're talking about 3-year milestones, you're not talking about deployments of eco-cities or implementing carbon capture. Instead, you're thinking along the lines of how do you educate key decision makers and grease the wheels so that you can accelerate the deployment? How do you not control the change and be in charge of the change, but how do you make change happen? How do you create that tipping point? So I liken it to, finding the little tiny buttons that we can push to have great change in China. Now, luckily, China is a centralized government, and so there's actually a handful of people that control these little buttons. And if you work with the right partners, you can, even as a small, young NGO like JUCCCE, we can quite effectively push those buttons. But I think that the energy industry traditionally hasn't been looking at those small buttons and greasing the wheels. They've been really looking at, how do you do large, the panaceas, the science and technology and the things that take much, much longer than the next 5 to 8 years that we have. So one of those sort of the greasing the wheel activities that we do is create tools for collaboration. And these are sort of obvious, I think, for people who are reading, business school books, but things like doing dialogue, cross-sector and international dialogue, where you really are talking about innovative ideas. This is, in generally speaking, in China, when you participate in U.S.-China energies, it's a very, there's a lot of protocol. There isn't a lot of room for dialogue. So what we do is we then follow up behind the scenes with small to medium to large size forums, and we really listen. We facilitate. And I like to say that we're sort of a potluck party hostess extraordinaire. So we make sure that the right guests are in the room, that we have the good food, that the discussion's good, and people leave feeling like they've created a network. And part of that, I believe, is opening up the silk curtain, especially today, leading towards Copenhagen. I think it's even more important to tell people what's happening in China versus what they think is happening in China. So just this trip, I get a lot of remarks. Wow, it's amazing that Hu Jintao has said that China is going to start to go green. And I'm like, wow, we've been going green. You know, there's a lot of stuff. We banned free distribution of plastic bags countrywide last year. You know, we have this 5-year plan that reduces energy intensity per unit GDP by 20% in 5 years. We have this top 1,000 energy consuming industries program that, you know, focuses on industries' emissions and energy use. So, boy, we're going green. It just so happens that it's the first time that Hu Jintao has stepped onto U.S. soil and really talked about it. So really working the Western media is one of the things that we've realized we've had to step into the role of. So what are those key buttons? Now, Cole, since we have David Mohler here, I'm going to completely skip this part of the speech, but let him talk about what's happening in China. We also have a friend, Ming Sung of Clean Air Task Force, who's, I think, a genius and really knows what's happening in this space, so I'm not going to talk about it. You know, pollution in China, I think the reason why we are going green is because we smell it and eat it, and, you know, swallow it every day. And, you know, the Cornell study that came out, I think it was a year and a half ago, that says 40% of deaths worldwide are caused by pollution. You know, it's certainly happening in China. Children, you know, I have this China cough. My son has this China cough. It faces you every day. The traffic faces you every day. When I go to IKEA on the weekends, I can't go anywhere without bumping into somebody. So pollution is a reality, and so we're motivated. You know, beyond the economic incentives, beyond the, you know, Copenhagen incentives, we are incented because we want to have a healthy, harmonious society. If I throw in a little bit of propaganda there. So is China going green? Again, I'm not going to make this a lecture about how fast we're going green. I think people know here in this room that we've exceeded our targets in wind, that we have a subsidy on solar, rooftop distributed solar. We have the ambition to have 20 by 20, so 20% of our energy mix by renewables by 2020. So is China going green? I think that we are close to that tipping point. In the last 2 years, JUCCCE has been doing a lot of work to try and get us there. So what are some of those buttons? In the last year and a half, I've really been talking about the need to go beyond the ambitious central level policies that have already been written in stone and really help us implement them. And what we're really lacking is vocational training to create these green workforce, these green workers that know how to build these 100-story tall skyscrapers, and who are maintaining the wind turbines or putting the solar panels on the rooftops. One of the things that, for example, we do is sit down in a room maybe with somebody like Ken Langer, head of EMSI over here, and brainstorm, how can we really increase the rate that we're educating people so that they know how to do waterproof membranes behind insulation, etc. Energy audits, huge thing. Collaboration, again, some of the things are pretty obvious when you start working in China that can be fixed very easily. So we don't have to be talking about deploying huge eco-cities to change the way China is creating and using energy. There are things like a Web 2.0 website. How come we don't have a bilingual Web 2.0 website that is a clearinghouse for all energy products today? Why is it that there's lack of transparency because of the language and geographical barriers when we have Amazon, and eBay and all the Wikipedia out there for years now to follow? So actually, JUCCCE is working on this. It's called the JUCCCE Energy Blueprint, and we're tapping into software development companies like Augmentum in China, or Jimmy Wales, founder of Wikipedia, or a new board member who's the CEO of a collaborative software company, to do exactly this. So we would like to tap into this room and every other room around the world, because everybody has some piece of knowledge that can give us real-time insight as to what's going on in energy sectors. This would save us tremendous amount of time if we're able to just cut the amount of time that it takes to find the right people, the right companies, and have some way to determine what are the most impactful programs and provide resources to those programs. So those are some of the things that we're working on. Smart Grid is one of our key buttons that we've identified, or actually Steve here identified for us. And so our Smart Grid Cooperative started about 1.5 years ago, bringing in people like the Commissioner of California Public Utilities Commission, bringing in Steve and other experts to talk to CERC, the Electricity Regulatory Commission, talk to the State Grid, one of 2 utility companies in China, have 100-person forums, have 30-person forums. And when we first started, people really didn't know what Smart Grid was. Literally, we had to write a report. Here's what Smart Grid is. You know, it's not just about electric vehicles. And this is the benefit to China: reliability, communication standards across generation through end use, and getting renewables onto the grid. So we are very happy that in May of this year, we played a large part in getting the State Grid to announce the intention to implement Smart Grid by 2020. So just in 1.5 years, I think we can really push that button to create a tipping point. The next step for us is really to help them accelerate the 4 demo cities that they've identified for experimenting with what's the right smart grid combination. And then once that is successful, they will scale that across the country. What's interesting about this is a great example of how a centralized government can really make great change quickly. In China, instead of 3,200 plus utilities, we have really 1.1 utility. And in the State Grid, there's a geek squad called CEPRI, the China Electricity Power Research Institute, that, you know, there's a very small handful of people that you have to enable to make the right decision. So I think I'm very pleased with that. Another button is urbanization. You probably have read McKinsey's preparing for an urban billion report. If not, please download it from their McKinsey website. Over the next 20 years, 350 million people will be moving into cities. So we'll have 1 billion people living in cities. We'll have 221 cities of 1 million or more people. We will have probably 16 hub and spoke cities of 60 million people or more. We are going to be building 50,000 new skyscrapers of 30 stories or more or higher. And I can go on, but that's a lot of energy. It's a lot of cement. It's a lot of steel. It's a lot of people. Oops, wrong. Sorry. Yeah, well, okay. So our Mayoral Training program is geared towards this. So we now work with the Ministry of Housing and Urban Rural Development and the Central Organization Department, who do mandatory training for mayors 1 week to 4 weeks at a time. And we go in there and we bring in experts from around the world, case studies, vendors, and financial resources to create a turnkey solution for mayors as they are looking for solutions to go green. So China is at a point where they don't need to be lectured about why to go green. They know that. They lecture themselves. What they want is just literally a solution handed to them on a silver platter. So that's what we're trying to do with our Mayoral Training program. And if Jennifer allows me, I'll show you a movie a little bit later, but that in action. Consumers obviously are a huge button in China. So again, we're reaching out of the normal energy space to recruit people like Du Zhen, the first supermodel of China. She's standing next to Oku, our GM of our lighting program, who was the former general manager of GE's Asia Pacific Lamps Group. And she's working with us to distribute light bulbs, to teach students. She's going to a Shanghai high school in a week with us to teach them for an hour about energy savings and distribute light bulbs. Here's an event with L'Oreal where we had a whole bunch of green tips and people could explore different ways to go green. And this is the L'Oreal event, a Lingzi mushroom lit up by compact fluorescent light bulbs. We also are trying to, that's a horrible picture of me, but it's a great picture of our 2-page supplement in the China Daily, which came out of our last forum, the same day of our last forum. And it's a good example of how we're working with press and not just being quoted by press to do supplements for news you can use. So this is the supplement. You know, here, you know, we're working with, you know, consumer-y type magazines. Sometimes we do 1-page, sometimes we do 6-page supplements. This is a P-paper business in Chinese, we're working with Chinese National Geographic International, so National Geographic in English, and trying to help consumers make the shift that way. So in China, you know, today we're just starting to get celebrity interest in going green. So juice can actually make a huge difference in pushing that tipping point for consumerism. So we talked about our Mayoral Training program. Whoops. This is some pictures of our Mayoral Training program, site visits to the first plastic bottle recycling plant, the Bird's Nest and the Zero Energy Olympic Village. Nikki Gavron, the former deputy mayor of London, who started the C40s program, who came to visit, us signing a contract with the training center, and the former mayor of Salt Lake City coming and talking to different mayors. So if I can either stop or I can play a snippet of my movie.
Snippet?
Would anybody like to see the Mayoral Training program? Okay.
Yeah, she need a drawing.
Okay.
If technology helps us out.
If the sound.
Yeah, trust me.
Thank you, AV girl. China today is not the China of yesterday. In the last year and a half, China has actually become one of the most progressive countries trying to set energy policies. My name is Peggy Liu, and I'm the chairperson of JUCCCE, Joint U.S.-China Cooperation on Clean Energy, a nonprofit that is trying to change the way China creates and uses energy. I'd like to tell you a little bit about our Mayoral Training program. We're working in conjunction with the Mayoral Training Center, which is a center that's run by two ministries, the Ministry of Housing and Urban Rural Development and the Central Organization Department. They invite mayors from around the country, 683 cities.
我叫贾连平，来自陕西省的晋城市，副市长。人口呢220万，城市的人口呢42人。
辽宁省阜新市人民政府，我们所在的城市呢是193万人口。
我来自重庆市大渡口区人民政府。 重庆有3200万人口。
They come and sit for 30 days, sometimes 7 days, but it's mandatory. At one point in your term, you should come and listen about how do you become a mayor. And so what we're doing is we're creating a part of that course to focus on energy smart city initiatives. And so this is a great opportunity for people outside of China to come in and bring expertise, bring technologies, bring products, because they're so desperately trying to be the best they can, as fast as they can. People from around the world are helping us develop this curriculum.
This is my first visit to China, and so it's a very, very special occasion for me.
In fact, this is my first time to Beijing, and it's also going to be my first time to Shanghai. I'm going to go and take the train on Tuesday, so I look forward to visiting your city.
As one of the first United States mayors to come and address Chinese mayors, I frankly feel very humbled because there's so much good work here being done that we're not aware of in the United States. But I'm also very honored to be able to share some of our success stories and hope that that serves to inspire.
We're urbanizing at a very scary pace here in China. We're building 2 New York cities a year. Think about the infrastructure that's going in and the pace that that's going in at. What we need to do is provide green initiatives that are immediately deployable. So bring together successful stories around the world, bring together the vendors that can help mayors deploy these locally, help bring financial opportunities to these mayors, and say, hey, look, mayors and vice mayors, here are levers that are under your control in your city. Here's how you can bring energy efficiency and green jobs to your city.
浙江省徐州市的副市长张月平，我们这个城市啊是在浙江的西部，是闽浙赣皖的一个中心城市，有246万人口。这是在学习啊，特别是那个两型社会的，这应该说也是收获还是比较大的。一个从理念上、理论上，我们有了很大的提高。第二个呢，就是了解了当今这个国际国内啊，这个在节能减排这方面的一些成功的这个做法。 能使我们有一个很好的见解。第三个呢，这个通过学习和考察，我们会回去以后啊，怎么样子进一步按照这个科学发展观的要求，怎么样子落实好可持续发展，做好节能减排啊，我们也有一些新的想法和打算。我想这种形式是非常好。
资源节约性、环境友好性这个专题研究班啊，对我也有很大的收获，很有启发。我觉得这个班办得非常好，也非常及时。现在就是地方正在开展落实科学发展观这样一个深入学习实践科学发展观这样一个活动。参加这个班，通过这个学习啊，我感觉收获很大。所以我们今后在节能减排方面呢，有大量的这个项目要推进，也希望得到这个大家的支持。
但是我觉得这种班适合在西部多搞一下，偏重让西部的领导啊多来听听。为什么呢？不要走东部或者是发达地区那个先发达先发展后治理的这种弯路，他们今后的治理费用巨大。这种教训可以让西部去汲取一些，是吧？能够找出他们的特点去发展这个，而且还能保护原生态，给中国人民、给世界人民留下一块净土，是吧？
JUCCCE is doing incredible work with real results, and as it pulls people together to work with one another and to learn from each other, I think there is enormous possibility for very effective, radical, rapid change. China's mayors have an enormous challenge ahead of them, but a great opportunity to make a real difference.
Chinese leaders in the government are the next generation of leaders, and they're really trying to make China the best that it can be. We're very honored to be working with these ministries and with the Mayoral Training Center, and we invite you to take a look at our website, JUCCCE.com, to see how you can get involved in writing case studies, in helping translate case studies, in sponsoring this program, in being a speaker at one of our classes. I hope to see you soon. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of an idea of what we do. We are really about collaboration. It's not about JUCCCE. JUCCCE is not meant to, you know, when we first started JUCCCE, we were really focused on just 10 years. So instead, what we want to do is enable people like Jennifer, or like Patrick over here from GridPoint, or Ming Sung from Clean Air Task Force, or Ken, or Julian Wong from CAP, all these people to really be successful. So if we can do that, I think we can help accelerate the greening of China. And maybe with that, I'd like to invite David to talk about coal.
To talk about coal. Oh.
Yeah, or smart grid.
Hadn't planned to talk about
smart grid, or.
Sure, I'm going to talk from here if you'll indulge me. I broke my leg a few weeks ago, and when I stand on it for very long, it's very uncomfortable. So I think you can see me and hear me okay. If you can't, speak up and we'll do it a little bit differently. First, let me tell you just a little bit about who we are at Duke. We are the largest generator of electricity in the Americas and the third largest in the U.S. We are the largest coal-fired generator and the third largest coal-fired generator in the U.S. and also the third largest nuclear generator in the U.S. Some other numbers that I like to throw around a little bit is we are the third largest emitter of CO2 in the U.S., and we are the 12th largest emitter of CO2 in companies in the world. And if, in fact, we were a nation in the UN, we would be 41st. And I share that with you not to brag, but to tell you that we understand the magnitude of the challenge ahead of us. We are, between now and 2050, we will replace every single one of our generating units that's in service today. So we have an incredible opportunity to decarbonize our fleet over that time frame. And we have some very aggressive goals to significantly begin that decarbonization now and to significantly reduce our CO2 footprint by 2030. So we kind of have some milestones along the road. So to the points that both Steve and Peggy have made, we're not kind of waiting around to do it. We're beginning to do it now. So when I talked to Jennifer about meeting with you today, her first question was, you know, what in the world is Duke Energy doing in China? And I've had the same question even from a number of folks that I work with at Duke. Little puzzled by it sometimes. But let me give you kind of the history. Excuse me. A little over, I guess a summer ago, Jim Rogers, my boss, his oldest grandchild had a very significant birthday, and he asked his grandson where, you know, he said, "I'll take you any place you want to go for your birthday," and he was very surprised that his grandson said, "Well, I want to go to China." So they did. They went to China. They went to Xi'an. They went to Beijing. They went to Shanghai. And as all of you who grew up and were acculturated in the U.S. who have been to China probably can relate to, when you're there in person, you know, it doesn't take long for you to get this kind of, oh my God feeling of, you know, the scale of the place, the speed of the place, the energy of the place, and you know, for a lot of us in the West, it's not something that it's hard to get exposure to that until you're really there. So at any rate, Jim got really excited about China, and he and I started talking about it. And at about that same time, if you'll recall, the financial crisis was just starting to feed its way through the global economy. So we really spent some time trying to think through, well, what does all this mean? How do all these trends come together, and what does it mean for Duke, and what does it mean for our objective to be a key player in decarbonizing our society? So we were really focused on the U.S. And we began to realize, as we read the you know, China's Urban Billion, the McKinsey Global Institute report, and really started looking at some data that almost no matter what China does, if it does nothing, if it does everything, it is going to set the curve for what happens with climate. And as you know, as kind of the number one and the number two emitters of CO2 globally, it just became clear to us that, number one, we really needed to work together to address the issue, that it's really a G2 problem, not a G8 problem or a G20 problem or somebody else's problem. It's our problem, and we really need to get at it together. Secondly, we also began to talk with some people in China. Peggy and Juice were very instrumental in making some great introductions for us, as was Clean Air Task Force and Ming Sung. And we had a number of other entrees to begin some conversations. And as we had those conversations, it also became increasingly clear to us that we had a lot to offer each other. You know, as Peggy mentioned, China's got, well, I spoke to the scale issue a little bit, I think, but, you know, China's developing so quickly and at such scale, and they have the ability to move so fast, largely because of their system of government. But, you know, NRDC decides they're going to do something, they go do it. Whereas in this country, if Duke decides we're going to go do something, it's going to be a while. You know, we're going to go through all kinds of hurdles, and we're going to go through all kinds of litigation, and we're going to have to resolve a number of stakeholder issues. Not a bad thing, just makes the time scale different. So we saw a real opportunity to work together with our Chinese counterparts and really accelerate our ability to bring technologies to commercial scale and to bring them to market. And from our perspective as Duke, what that provides in terms of opportunities is we believe we can provide our customers with the technologies that we're going to need to clean up our footprint quicker, cheaper, and with less risk than if we just sort of went it alone. And in the process, we think that we can help you know, China develop as well. So we think we can help meet the policy objectives really of both countries by doing this. And what we've seen kind of on the policy front, as I think, Steve, as I think you alluded to earlier, there's a whole lot of talk. There's really a whole lot of talk. And, you know, Jim Rogers likes to say that you've got the chattering class and you've got the doing class. And clearly the, you know, there are a lot of people involved in planning. There are a lot of people involved in studying. We want to be involved in doing. And so in the last, I guess, a couple months here, as the end result of a longer process, we have signed a number of memoranda of understanding now with Chinese counterparts. And so we have one with Huanan, and we have several, actually, at this point with ENN. And our initial kind of focus is on joint technology development. So we're getting together, we're defining specific projects, and we have a number defined already, where we're going to do work together and probably investment together to accelerate technology development, to accelerate information exchange, and really to try to move things forward and to actually do things. We have there's been a lot of talk in the U.S. about a project called FutureGen, which is a IGCCE project with intended to have carbon capture and sequestration, and it's been on again, off again, on again, off again. Meanwhile, our Edwardsport project, which has the same objectives, is 35% complete, being constructed right now. And the GreenGen project in China is also off and running at this point. And so we feel like if we can get together with one and share experiences from Edwardsport and from GreenGen, we can accelerate both projects and just make it happen more quickly. So that's kind of what we're about. One other thing that I would say is that, once again, from a Duke and U.S. perspective, I mentioned that we're going to retire, or that we have to replace our entire generation fleet between now and 2050. And that's really beginning to happen now. We have about 4,500 megawatts out of our U.S. fleet that we're really going to have to retire soon, largely because it's old, it's inefficient, and it's not clean. And, so that's staring us in the face. And 4,500 megawatts is fairly significant in terms of our total fleet. So we need to start making decisions right now. And we've been very, I would say, vocal advocates of carbon legislation. We think that we need carbon legislation. We think we need a price on carbon. And fundamentally, for our company, we think we need some kind of certainty about how we plan this next set of resources, which tags right back to our work with our Chinese counterparts. If we can understand which technologies are going to be commercial first, what that commercial scale is going to be, what the efficiency is going to be, what the costs are going to look like of the different technologies, then we can begin to make more intelligent decisions that we really have to start making right now for our shareholders and our customers. And that's a big part of what we're about. So let me look down through my PowerPoint slides here and see if I forgot anything. Thank you, Peggy. We are also very involved in smart grid. And so, see, I count on her for the PowerPoint slides and the suggestions. We're very involved in smart grid. We probably have the largest deployment of what I would call true smart grid in the U.S. today. A lot of our peer utilities have been very focused on automated meter reading, and we have actually taken an approach where we're not focused on the meter. We're focused on building an intelligent network so that we can really correlate data all across the system, all the way from generation through end use, to wring every last ounce of efficiency out of the system. And we've got a great start on it, and we've done a number of very interesting pilots. And we actually, I've been trying to engage a conversation with Chinese counterparts on this too, because I'm a little, I still feel like I'm a little bit ignorant really about exactly how the Chinese distribution system works, although Ming and others are helping me learn. But I guess my initial kind of intuitive read is that China, I think, has an opportunity to leapfrog the world, really, in building out this intelligent infrastructure. In the U.S., in the 20th century, our assignment was to get the country electrified and to do it as quickly and cheaply as possible. And we did that, and I think we did a really good job of that. But, today and going forward for the U.S. and China, the assignment is not just to provide electricity at an affordable price 24/7. It's really also to provide energy efficiency and low carbon. And that's a little bit different assignment. And to do that assignment, you really do need the intelligence that we're building out into our system. And China doesn't have to go through what we went through in the 20th century. They don't have to put the dumb stuff out there, because we're developing the smart stuff. It is becoming cheaper and cheaper. We've defined an architecture that is amenable to incremental technology improvement as we go forward. And so my view is that China can build out the smart stuff first and not have to kind of build the dumb stuff like we did and then rip it out later and replace it. So trying to keep that dialogue alive. Peggy's been very, very good in helping us there. And in fact, I think in November we're planning to meet with State Grid and talk with them for probably the third or fourth time about how we might be able to advance that ball. So, Jennifer, to keep you from having to use the hook, I think I've covered all my points, and I'll stop there, and we'll see what people want to talk about.
他们都很乖. They're all very obedient, right? Because I scare people. Well, now it's your turn. I have Natalie and where's Ada on the mics, Raise your hand. And do make sure that you say your name and affiliation real quick and have questions, comments. We've got, I do know that David has to be leaping over tall buildings to get to the airport right at 11. So just keep in mind that maybe a few early on questions to him before he escapes. These two that you can stay and tackle them afterwards as well. All right, so hands up. Right in the front row here, Natalie.
And then I think over there, there's the next question.
Yeah. My name is Shoichi Zhou. I'm from the Brookings Institution. I completely agree on the point that we are entering into a new age of create a tipping point to change the traditional paradigm of energy security. And then I have a question. How would you place the role of Japan, which has the most advanced clean energy and energy efficiency technologies? And despite the traditional or stereotyped interpretation of our Sino-Japanese political relations, we have had long, good experiences of collaboration, especially in the energy and energy efficiency sectors. And I'm wondering if you have any specific idea or opinions about the engagement of Japan in the collaboration of Sino-Chinese energy cooperation scheme. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Our name is a little bit of a misnomer now because it's joint U.S.-China collaboration, but actually we've been actively engaging other countries. So BC Hydro has visited, NL, our honorary committee, we just added John Koo, who of the LS Industries, so the former LG. In Japan, we have a group of people who are looking to create a series of case studies for our Mayoral Training course. And we would like to find the head of sustainability in Tokyo or some city to come and speak at our Mayoral Training course. So on November 13th, we've invited the head of sustainability for Korea to come. And you saw the head of New York City sustainability practice. The nice thing about JUCCCE is that we can bypass a lot of the politics, the protocol, all for the sake of education. And if you have connections in Tokyo, please reach out to us. We also invited a microgrid expert to come and speak at our Shanghai Smart Grid Conference, which unfortunately was canceled at the last minute because of swine flu. So they wouldn't even let him out of the country, and then swine flu happened in Shanghai, and they just canceled the entire conference. So we are trying to engage Tokyo or Japan, and we'd like to do so more.
Yeah, I want to jump in here, just so you know that, because the China Environment Forum, we've done more on the water area. We've brought U.S., Japan, Chinese experts together, and we actually have a new grant to focus on Lake Tai. So we've got some Guanxi in Japan. I think actually somewhere, I haven't met him yet, but I know Matt Turner is supposed to be out in the audience here from Future 500. If he's not here now, they're an organization that works with a lot of businesses also doing these kind of multi-stakeholder, and they've got a lot of connections in Japan. So, but yeah, again, that's the object of my meetings.
Yes.
To kind of help get these guys and anyone who comes up some Guanxi.
We've brought in Sudaseti from Alliance to Save Energy and Watergy from India to come and speak. We're talking to governments of Singapore, Jordan. So, JUCCCE is really about China and how to accelerate the greening of China.
Okay. David, do you want to jump in there
I
too?
do,
with that?
yeah. I focused on our relationships with China because that's what Jennifer made me do.
I know, I'm so mean.
But just this past Wednesday, I signed an MOU with J-Power for clean coal development, technology development. So we're not limited to China.
Okay, and someone has a mic there already, I think? Or just about, all right. Yes, sir.
Todd Johnson with World Bank.
Oh, actually, make sure it's turned on. It's on this side there. Hey, Todd, long time no see. It's on the very top. There's a very small. Well, it's actually webcast, so we do kind of need it. Do you have it? Is it on, Ada? Sorry, we got the AV guru. Sorry. We got new mics that used to have they have microscopic levers. There we go, Todd.
Yeah, if you were able to kick it just right.
Yeah.
Nope.
No. One more.
Sorry. Yeah, we're waiting for it, Todd. It's Todd from the World Bank.
Test.
He's a good guy. There we go.
Test. Thank you.
Oh, good.
Todd Johnson with the World Bank. My My question has to do with, I mean, both the U.S. and China have been doing a lot of, all of the low carbon has basically, we could say, been voluntary. It's basically what can be done in, for our own self-interest, in the case of China, local environmental incentives, et cetera. With the prospects of having an international agreement, which may be dim, but on climate, where the U.S. and China might take on increasingly binding targets. I won't go into the specifics of that, but the question is, how might that change, accelerate, modify what both the U.S. and China would do? And let's maybe focus it just on the power sector, because I know that's Duke Energy's focus. But, I mean, for instance, we've been seeing in the U.S. a lot of coal-fired power plants being basically put on hold, licensing issues, investors kind of hesitant to put in money. I imagine we're a little bit further away from that in China, of any kind of ban on coal-fired power plants for the foreseeable future. But just, can you speculate a bit about how that type of a binding, or how a binding commitment for both the U.S. and China might change development pattern in both countries?
I would love to talk to that. And first of all, I want to tell you that from my perspective, Todd's not actually from the World Bank. He's a fellow boy from Indiana, so we're both native Hoosiers, so that's a good thing. And actually, Jennifer's got some Hoosier.
I lived there 7 years, so I'm an honorary Hoosier. Yeah.
But anyway, I'll get off that topic. Here's how I think about it. In the U.S., we like to think about CO2 as a pollution problem. In China and India and Brazil, it's an economic development problem, more so than anything else. And a part of what we're trying to do with our relationships with our international counterparts for technology development is to get the cleanest technologies down the cost curve as fast as we can, because until they are low-cost alternatives, it's going to be very tough for countries like China and India to pick to move away from coal. I mean, it's really as simple as that in my mind. So what would an agreement in Copenhagen do? I think it would change things incrementally, potentially, for us. It would depend greatly on how it's structured. And when I talked to Juan for the first time, I met with them in their offices in May. I was really pleasantly surprised at their intense focus on really reducing their footprint, but they go about it from an economic development perspective. So they're very focused on ultra supercritical coal to reduce their carbon intensity. Because, job one for them is the job we did in the U.S. in the 20th century, just getting the country electrified and increasing the standard of living. So for them to say, well, absolute cap, we're going to leave it right where it is today and try to reduce it from there, doesn't make a whole lot of sense. In 2006, which is the last year I've got good numbers for, in the U.S. per capita we consumed 12.5 megawatt hours of electricity per person. In China it was 2.8, and half of that, 1.4, went into products for export. So if you think about quality of life, if you think about how we in the West use electricity, and you just look at that disparity to say, well, you guys have to stop here at 1.4 megawatt hours per person per year and reduce from there, it's just not a reasonable dynamic. So I think a lot of the issue has to do with how we get the right metrics in place, and once those metrics are in place, then I think what we can do is accelerate.
I just wanted to leave you with two statistics. One is that China has been adding 70 gigawatts of power each year for the last few years, but between 2006 and 2009, they shut down 7% of all China's generation capacity, or 54 gigawatts in 3 years. So one, they're really trying to do up and out, I think is the term for coal-fired power plants. And also I'm going to quote Julian from his Green Leap Forward blog, which is great, that new plants in China are as efficient as plants anywhere else. So is it Yuhuan? I'm not sure what city it was, but they can generate a kilowatt hour of electricity with 283 grams of coal. This is in comparison to, I think, a level of 370 grams in 2005. So, steady improvement.
Okay, some other questions. Oh, Natalie, you're right there.
I'm Karen Polensky from MIT.
Hey, Karen.
I can very seldom make it.
Didn't I see you in Dalian?
Yes.
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 And I've been waiting for years to get her up on the podium.
We were at the Davos conference, and this was really great. I'd like to ask David about the technologies. First of all, my own view, I've been working in China since 1986. A lot of it has been on energy. One thing that it seems to me is that we also have to be realistic that over the next few years, China's not going to become free of coal. We're going to be using coal, so looking at clean coal technologies for electric generation is very important. Can you talk a bit about what Duke is looking into? We've been doing some work with Shenhua and with some other places in China about electric power generation, but I'd like to hear what Duke is doing.
Sure. Well, one of the things we've done, which has been unpopular, actually, is we are building a new supercritical coal plant in North Carolina. Got a lot of opposition to that plant, but what it has allowed us to do, it's an 825 megawatt plant, if I've got the numbers right. What it's allowed us to do is shut down 1,000 megawatts of older, dirtier coal, very similar to what Peggy just described that is going on in China. And we in doing that, we can reduce all the other bad stuff, the SOx, the NOx, the mercury, the fine particulate, and we can essentially break even on carbon. Now, not great from a carbon reduction perspective, but really good from an overall environmental footprint perspective. So that's one thing. We've got more of that in store here as we go forward. We will retire the 4,500 megawatts that I mentioned earlier of older, dirtier coal and replace it with cleaner forms of generation. But our real focus right now is on our Edwardsport IGCC plant, where we will do carbon capture and sequestration. And that's a new tech. It's not, the technologies aren't new, but actually doing it at this scale is new. Okay, let's put it that way. And so we've got not so much technical hurdles to overcome as we do a number of regulatory policy and legal issues to deal with, as I'm sure you know. So that's something we're looking at hard, and a part of our technology focus with our Chinese counterparties is in that arena. So their ENN, for example, is developing a low temperature catalytic process that is very interesting. We're also going to be working with them on algal CO2 capture with beneficial reuse. So there's kind of a whole smorgasbord of things, but our big focus right now is our Edwardsport plant.
I'm going to interject in, prerogative of chair. Curious about, I just met a couple weeks ago with Yu Yunshan and Cirque, because he actually, they've approached me, seeing that I can also be a matchmaker somehow. And one of the issues that he brought up about the smart grid that China is finding quite challenging, as I'm sure you know, is actually just getting all this great renewable energy they've been developing on the grid. Like at any one time, 30% of China's wind power can't get on the grid. Mm-hmm. There's some technical issues, there's some policy issues, financing. Is that part of the mix of you talking to them, or also, asking Juice too? Is this a topic? 'Cause
we have talked about it. I don't have a magic wand on that one yet, but we've talked about it.
Is it something that Duke focuses on in the U.S. as well?
It absolutely is. We have 720 megawatts of wind operating today, and a development pipeline of 5,000 more. And there are large transmission and storage issues around that. And so, yeah, we're all working.
So this could be a very promising area of
you bet.
Cooperation. What about Juice?
Well, that's essentially our goal for the Smart Grid Cooperative. So remember, the first step is just to get them interested. Mm-hmm. And now they've identified 4 cities that they want to move forward on as demo cities for Smart Grid.
What are they?
I think it's Beijing, Hangzhou, Xiamen, and a smaller city that I can't remember, but it starts with a Y.
Small is relative.
It's got 30 million people.
Yeah, 30 million.
Yeah.
At least 3 million people or something. But so, our goal is to work with vendors like GridPoint and Duke and Cisco and, all these people in the smart grid space, bring them together so that the smart grid ecosystem makes sense to these people who are laying it out. One of the things that we're considering, our members have to sort of vote on this, but is to do basically a Chinese Envision Center. If you don't know what that is, it's Duke's showcase, 2 of them here in the U.S. that you can walk into and see, touch, feel, maybe smell smart grid. And what I realized was that showing these pictures of the Envision Center to Chinese officials, a light bulb goes off because they really don't understand the technologies of smart grid at all. Mm-hmm. And they don't really care about the intricacies, but you see, that's a building. oh, that's a meter, that's a car, you know, I sort of get it. And I think that, you know, again, if you think about greasing the wheel is our job, I think that a Chinese Envision Center would go very far as a first step.
Okay, got some other questions out there. Natalie, you're there, and then Ada, give it right there. The gentleman there. We'll do 1, 2. Yep.
Yeah, I'm Jim Quinn from U.S. Department of Energy, and I have a question to David and Peggy too, really. China developing a natural gas resource. It's coming about. Combined heat and power. I don't hear in any of the smart grid or the power options that this is even being looked at. You know, if this were the kind of option that you have, say, in Europe, you would have substantial improvements in carbon. So could you comment, is that going on?
Funny you should bring that up. We actually had a lengthy discussion with ENN about that last week because, you know, they are a natural gas distributor in China, serving 40 million customers. So we have actually a part of our joint work together will be to develop that comprehensive energy efficiency view, including both gas and electricity. For Duke per se, we serve 500,000 gas customers in the Midwest, so it's a very, very small part of our operations. And frankly, the kind of community energy, combined heat and power, it has some real regulatory hurdles for us as we attempt to do that in the U.S. We do that on the commercial side of our business. We actually run on-site generation and heat facilities for a number of large companies, including Eastman Kodak and a number of others. Anyway, I won't get long-winded on you, but we're working it with our partners.
We're mainly approaching it through our Mayoral Training course, where we're working with Broad Air to write a series of case studies on what they're doing in CHP. They're an air conditioning company. We find that, you know, it's early on. I think this is a huge area of opportunity, and so I think the Mayoral Training cases and talking to the mayors and the economic development zone leaders, I think, is a great entree in.
Okay, Ada, the gentleman right there, and then Natalie to Ken up here, in the blue. Oh, and then Wenran Zhang.
Hi, my name's Dan Yi. I'm with Sinotech Technology. We work with emerging Chinese green technologies. And I have a question for David. You mentioned about building wind capacity and, you know, having some problem putting onto the grid. I was wondering whether you guys are working with any storage technology. I mean, that's one thing that would be like a total earthquake in the energy industry if we can efficiently store electricity. And I know there are different technologies coming up. I want to hear from you, like, you know, your effort.
Well, we are primarily domestic today. In fact, I just met with one yesterday afternoon, had a long conversation. There are a number of what I would call developing storage technologies at the scale that would allow you to firm wind, and the ones that look financially most promising are the furthest from commercialization today, that I've seen anyway. Now we do have pump storage in the Carolinas, so we've got where we don't have any wind, so there's kind of a mismatch there. But yeah, we are. Short answer.
Okay. How about Ken right there, and then to Wenran.
Well, as you know, Peggy, we're very much the leader, you might say.
Oh yeah, say who you are, because I mean,
Ken
we know you.
Langer with the EMSI, which is now part of UTC, actually. I guess it's fair to say we're the leader in green buildings in China. We have over 100 projects, and you know, I go around and say that very proudly. But then when I look behind and see how many projects we're not doing, it's discouraging. And so I think we do need to look at buildings, which obviously account for 40+% of all of the electric demand, and look at that and say, what can we do on a very large scale, either through a U.S.-China cooperation or through some kind of a private sector cooperation, and not just do it on a large scale in a place like, let's say, Shanghai, but incorporate some of the technologies that we've been talking about, like for buildings, micro turbines and combined heat and power and cooling, where we've been working with one very large Fortune 500 company to do this in their sort of showcase green building in Beijing, and we've found enormous obstacles just in terms of the resistance from the utilities. And so there's a lot
in China.
in China. The higher, the national power people are fine. Not power. The national NDRC, is it?
Mm-hmm.
But when you get to the utility level, there's a lot of resistance and fear of taking customers away, that sort of thing. So I guess, well, just to wrap up, to say that we're very interested in any kind of partnership with people in this room to create some environment on a large scale around the building sector.
Actually, that was, and if you could get Natalie the microphone to Wenran while I jump in here, because actually that was one of the questions that I had about if anyone can speak intelligently about the utility companies in China. Because, I mean, again, I know that at the top, we see this in all policy sectors in environment in China. The central government gets it, and it's true that the mayors seem willing, but there clearly are some obstacles, and maybe we could mention about what are you seeing and, maybe how to get around some of those initially, like with the utilities, like he was mentioning. Are you guys engaging the utilities?
Yeah, we work directly with them for the Smart Grid Cooperative. So again, just background, there's only two. The main one is State Grid. In 2007, they spent $35 billion on new power grid construction, and $18 billion of that was sourced internationally. The State Grid was intended to be broken up into smaller grid companies like the Southern Grid, but instead it's remained the single largest utility, and they have 5 smaller companies underneath them that report to them. And as I mentioned, they have this sort of geek squad. They have this one regulatory commission that governs the entire country. So it's a very tightly controlled group, and I think that they have made the decision to go fully forward with Smart Grid. Now they're doing it backwards, or not backwards, but opposite of how the U.S. is going into Smart Grid. The U.S. is approaching it from residential, and the Chinese have really been working for the last 6 years on ultra-high voltage transmission lines, so 1 meter in diameter, to get wind from Inner Mongolia up north to the coastal cities where we have 60% of our population, and from the coal in the inner China to the coastal population. So they are really focused on transmission first, and then it'll sort of trickle down to distribution. Okay. I don't know if that answers your question.
But are you seeing still, they seem willing, but there clearly are still obstacles or challenges for them to try to move forward on the Smart Grid in terms of...
I think maybe more specific examples. Did you want to say something?
I was just going to say, this is one of the reasons why we focused on Smart Grid two years ago, and there was, as Peggy said, this was, the focus had been on ultra high bandwidth transmission, not on Smart Grid.
Yeah.
And the lead time...
Strong grid, they call it.
Yeah, that's right, strong grid. So the lead time in Smart Grid is critical. So laying the conceptual framework was important. So we dove in aggressively in 2007 and early 2008 with laying out a roadmap for Smart Grid and what the lead times were and what the planning cycle had to be, because there was, from our standpoint with JUCCCE, we have limited areas that we could tackle with them, and this was the one that had the highest impact, longest shadow, and what we found when you take a look at some of the other areas that are developing, the newer technologies that have the greatest impact, even in energy storage, for example, they are years away, unfortunately. They are years away, and there's a lot of basic science that still has to be tackled. So in terms of what can be commercialized, what can be implemented in the next few years that'll have the biggest impact, that's why the focus has been literally on Smart Grid itself. There's a lot of other promising areas.
Let me frame that for just a minute, if I can. Just the difference between the U.S. and China that I'm aware of anyway. If I just look at Duke's numbers, we have roughly 4 million customers. Of those 4 million customers, 3.5 million are residential and small commercial customers, and 0.5 million are large commercial and industrial. So and 70% of our total load and 70% and increasing is actually residential, small commercial, and only 30% and decreasing is large commercial and industrial. So in the U.S., that's the situation. We've already got the transmission built. the largest numbers, the law of large numbers tells you you've got to attack your small customers to make the difference you want to make. In China, just the numbers I quoted earlier, 2.8 megawatt hours per capita, with half of that going into industrial production. Very different situation. But the fact of the matter is, even in the U.S., the biggest bang for the buck is actually in commercial. It is in commercial space. So when you talk about building efficiency and building green buildings, that's where we see the biggest bang for the buck in the U.S.
Okay, we got a lot of questions, so we're going to go Wenran, Jillian, and we'll move on downside here, okay? Go Wenran. Succinct.
Yeah, Wenran Jiang, University of Alberta in Canada.
And
I'm
a fellow
public
at the
policy
Woodrow
scholar
Wilson
now with Jennifer here, China Environment Forum for this fall. I want to congratulate the JUCCCE, a lot of innovative ideas that you presented, a lot of things you've done as a new NGO, and especially impressive for venture capitalists now getting this into non-profit activities.
Thanks.
A great job. But my question is more about your business model. I mean, operating. More specifically, how do you finance all what you do? I mean, do you write a check or your personal earnings, or Duke
Actually,
write your
have
check?
not got paid anything for the last 2 years.
Or you know, for the mere trainings, all those things that the government in China or the U.S. are paying. So just curious about how because how you sustain all this. A lot of great stuff you do. Thank you.
So I think that you know, we're different from standard NGOs in that we work heavily with companies like Duke or GridPoint or Cisco or Covanta or McKinsey's who want to create markets in the case of smart grid or expand markets in the case of green buildings. And what's interesting in China is that there's really a lack of what you call a system integrator in the PC world or the IT world. And you know, part of this is because China's not very good at customer-facing solutions. And so if you think about who are the decision makers that are trying to go green, what they really want is somebody to just step up and hand them a silver platter with all the elements on this platter that is necessary to help them go green. Think about our Mayoral Training program. So we act somewhat as a system integrator. In those cases, the companies that work with us sponsor us. In some cases, we have governments like Yangzhou who take care of all the expenses when we go out and do a 100-person event in their city. Or the Mayoral Training Center does all the admin at their site. We have a little bit of funding from foundations and governments, but very little, mainly because we don't have a base here in the U.S. yet, but that's changing as of this week. I basically run it as an incubator. So each of the programs are essentially their own P&L. So for example, our lighting program, where we hope to distribute 10 million compact fluorescent light bulbs in exchange for their old incandescents. We're trying to finance this through carbon credits. So we worked with Anna Keat-Niederberger to create a new deemed savings methodology that went through, amendments went through. We have 2/3 of the carbon credits spoken for. We have term sheets signed. We're waiting for a last financer to step up to the plate so we can do this. Our supplier has committed to do free compact fluorescent recycling in this case. First ever domestic hazardous waste recycling program in China. We would do this through the schools and give students education on energy savings and say you can make a difference as well. And start today with this bulb, actually 18 bulbs per student. So it's 600,000 students, 10 million bulbs. But that's an example of how I basically put on my venture capital hat and say, how do we put these pieces together? We also lean heavily on our sponsors for non-financial support. Like, can I mention?
Sure.
That our offices are actually inside of Duke Energy's offices. So, you know, all of our offices are inside of one of our, you know, sponsors' offices. McKinsey has stepped up not just with free advice, but with translation, with production materials, with speaking, with moderating, with a whole bunch of stuff. So we're very, very highly leveraged. We don't have a lot of actual money, but we're extremely highly leveraged. So, and it's really because we are doing things that's core to the business partners' business.
Okay, good. Julian, and then you're going to pass the mic back. 1, 2, 3.
Sure.
Okay.
Julian Wong. I do international climate and energy policy at the Center for American Progress. And I guess it's a question for David, but Peggy and Steve, please feel free to weigh in. And it's on the question of technology transfer, and I'm sure you get this question all the time. I guess there's a lot of skepticism that still remains about when you're talking about U.S.-China collaboration on something that's very high-tech in nature, about this fear of not just losing technology, but also the jobs that go with it. It's become apparent that this conventional wisdom that technology transfer is going to happen from the west to the east or from the north to the south is starting to fray at the edges a little bit, because we're starting to see, especially in the coal sector, that China's actually coming out with some of the most advanced technologies. But I guess, David, what is your response to that? Like when people express that sort of skepticism, and what's Duke Energy experience in sort of managing any sort of risk or perceived risks, especially in your deals with Huaneng and ENN?
Well, first of all, we have a study underway, which I believe should be completed next month, that we're doing with Gartner Rothkopf on jobs creation based on our joint technology development. And what we see that I believe will be confirmed by this study is that we will actually create jobs in both countries, both in the U.S. and China. So that's kind of, I guess, point number one. In terms of technology transfer per se, I've actually gotten a couple of shots across the bow from some of our vendors saying, oh my God, you're going to let the Chinese come in and steal all our intellectual property. And that's really not what we're about. I mean, we plan to live up to our agreements, as I'm sure our Chinese partners do. But what people don't realize is that the IP is the least of your worries when you're building a large industrial project like, for example, an IGCC plant. The IP is nice, but what you really want is the operating experience. It's all the stuff that you can't figure out until you go out there and do it, and figure out that, oh, gee, we shouldn't have put this next to that because they interfere kind of stuff. So that's a lot of what we're going to be sharing. But in terms of the flow of technology transfer, my current favorite example is ENN is going to send us an algae skid and 3 engineers to show us how to use it. So they're way ahead of us, and way ahead of anything I've seen in the U.S. in terms of their ability to really fine-tune that technology, and it's coming our way. So I think that answers your question. Hope so.
Okay, next. Yeah.
Yes, Gabriel Dion from Laval University in Canada, and intern in DC. I have 2 questions. Okay, first, what position does JUCCCE have on China's environmental impact outside of their borders? For example, oil production in Africa. And the other one, what kind of follow-up is JUCCCE doing with the Mayoral Training program?
Okay, and then pass the mic back to you. And then it's coming to you and you. I got you guys covered.
Yeah, I mean, that's a whole dinner conversation about China's impact beyond its borders. Pollution doesn't respect borders. Smokestacks don't respect borders. So, I think people know that 1/3 of particulate matter in California is coming from China, and that's probably going to increase. China's aware of that. So, I look to people like Zhou Dadi, the former head of NDRC's Energy Research Institute, who say China understands that climate change and pollution are man-made, and China is going to take and understands that they have a responsibility to do their part. We are working in China because we really believe that because of the scale and the pace of growth, that's the key lever, that without a sustainable China, there's no sustainable world. Regarding Africa, again, that's more of a dinner conversation. I had a fascinating dinner conversation with a woman at World Economic Forum who is a China-Africa bridge. That's what she does about that exact issue. And suffice it to say, I think, China has been in Africa for decades and friends of Africa, and it's not a new thing that they're going there just for oil, but they really believe in helping the community that they're in. The second question was follow-up with mayors. So we have plans to scale the Mayoral Training program as we have funding for it. One is to build out the case study database, the bilingual case study database, so that everybody can use it, that we have 80 case studies at least that we can take to local cities who have asked us to come to visit their cities and do essentially the Mayoral Training there. We think that during these visits we can bring in, 2 people from EMSI, 2 people from, Broad Air, 2 people from Owens Corning, etc., it's essentially sales and marketing direct to the buyer. But on the other hand, it's fantastic value for the local mayor and the government officials to do workshops, charrettes. And so we hope to move in that direction. We also have this Juice Energy Blueprint Web 2.0 website that will also help do virtual collaboration.
Okay, and we're moving back to you, and then I'm going to come this side of the room because they're feeling rather neglected. Okay.
Great, thanks. My name is Christina Larson. I'm an editor at Foreign Policy Magazine and a fellow at the New America Foundation. Nice to meet some of you. I've met you virtually, Peggy, over email. I had a question really following on what Julian began to ask, which is sort of how you translate some of the great sort of research and initiatives that you're doing into a way that has impact on a Washington audience. There is, as Julian mentioned, a lot of skepticism about U.S.-China green cooperation, a vague sense that somehow China's recent success on alternative energy is threatening. Perhaps it's about jobs, but often I honestly don't know what the source of it is. When I talk to people and they're anxious, I mean, I'm myself trying to figure out where that anxiety lies. And I was wondering, just either in terms of specific facts or talking points, when you're talking to somebody who isn't already I guess a believer in the fact that, you know, U.S. and China cooperation on energy is a good thing, what are some of the things that have been most effective in, you know, sort of changing minds, and just any thoughts you have? Because that's something, you know, as a writer, that's my ground point. I first have to convince people this is a good thing before I can get into the details.
Dave, do you want to take
Yeah, let me first point. I think that there's a lot of skepticism. There's a lot of natural skepticism because of the complexity and because of the daunting nature of thinking of the size of China, the impact, and there's a lot of unknown. I mean, China is for a lot of Americans, for a lot of the U.S., they're still coming up the learning curve, and especially when you have a time of a lot of economic transition globally, you know, there's that leads to fear. I would say a couple things in focusing on how to bring this to a broader audience. First of all, most people do get the notion that China has one of the world's largest footprints from an economic and natural resource standpoint. And as Peggy mentioned, if you look at the fact that pollution knows no borders, environmental issues know no borders, and really energy impact knows no borders, that these are common shared issues, and the United States and China are the two leading players in this. And if you just understand that alone, then people can at least understand the need for it's better to work together than to ignore each other. Secondly, and this is to the heart of it, I think, for JUCCCE, is that you know, the greatest source of wind energy around energy is talk, and
we can tap that.
That's right. And I think with all due respect to the political and policy agreements in Copenhagen and previous attempts with Kyoto and others, it really comes down to action. It comes down to actually driving results. And so I think one thing I've found over the years in government forums and private forums is people do respect and understand action. They understand being entrepreneurial. They understand that does, you know, sort of taking a bull by the horns and doing something about it versus just talking about it is a good thing. And for an organization like JUCCCE that has government awareness but is an NGO, you know, it's a great proving ground for the fact that entrepreneurial activity and getting together people who just want to make an impact versus just government-to-government activity is actually how you get a lot of this done. And that, we found, takes away a lot of the skepticism. It breaks it down to what people can do themselves directly. And I know a lot of the recent activity we've had with a lot of celebrities in China, that's one of the reasons why they signed on, because they view this as not so much just a government issue.
So I think I feel, coming back to the U.S., that some people think China wants to take over the world, where I don't think it wants to take over the world. I think it's really focused on domestic issues. The GDP will grow 5 times by 2020. So they don't need to take over the world, frankly. I think that there's this fear because China's this very, very far away behemoth that there's no personal faces to China in the U.S. really. Hu Jintao coming to the U.S. really was the first time that a lot of people, I think, maybe even seen a Chinese person recently. One of the things that we're trying to do, well, it's true. One of the things that we're trying to do, I'm co-authoring a book with a Yale World Fellow that hopefully will come out next year, showcasing maybe 30 people on the ground, white and yellow, on the ground in China who are really working the landscape and sort of heroes, right? Other heroes. You know, JUCCCE is a network of many heroes. And we want to sort of open up the silk curtain by showcasing personal stories. I think breaking down the myth through people, personifying China is really, really important. I think that, again, the GDP growth, the urbanization, the fact that we've been urbanizing for 20 years, and the next 20 years we're going to urbanize at a pace that nobody's ever seen before. Largest animal migration the world has ever seen, 350 million people. This is a tremendous economic opportunity for foreign companies to come into China and tap into this domestic market. So this is a very interesting time these next 5 years because China has 40 eco-cities in development now. It's got 13 pilot cities for electric vehicles. It's got 4 demo cities that have been named for smart grid. It's got 3 cities that are experimenting with non-GDP growth KPIs, key performance indicators, and instead are using environmental and energy KPIs, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So it's in a great state of experimentation right now. And this is not going to happen forever. Once they find successful models, they're just going to replicate it across the country, like Xintiandi in Shanghai, like purses, right? So, you know, this is the time for American companies, for foreign companies to get into those demo cities and say, use our technologies. We are a friend to China. If you don't get in now, you will shut the door to the world's largest energy market. So I would say money talks. Green jobs, right? People are worried that it's like software development outsourcing, that somehow there's going to be, you know, a loss of jobs to China. You know, I think that the energy is only limited, the market is only limited by number of people in the world, where we're going to have 9.2 billion people by 2050 using a lot of energy. So this market is not capped like the software market. So I think people are using the wrong analogies, historical analogies, to view the upcoming 20 years.
Okay, we got this mafia over here. What we're going to do, I'll collect these 2 gentlemen's questions. Yes, you and you.
Robert Houston, retired Foreign Service. Germany has probably the largest proportion of renewable energy in its energy supply through feed-in tariff. This has brought on a lot of small-scale entrepreneurial projects. If China is interested in encouraging entrepreneurship, do they have any interest in a feed-in tariff?
And Graham, real quick.
Graham Smith, World Bank. Actually, I have a word of recommendation, encouragement to Peggy and a question for David. I was in the World Bank's office from 2002 to 2006 as the lead person on transportation. Shomik Mendirata, who got his 2 seconds in your excellent movie, took my office when I came back to Washington. Now I'm doing backup for him, technical backup from headquarters. What you are doing seems to me the answer to a maiden's our prayer over the past few years in trying to help China see the solutions to reducing the energy intensity of urban transportation. But it has been a hard slog for us because we've had to work city by city up until this point, with mayors coming to us asking for financing for ring roads, and we're trying to persuade them to go for bus rapid transit, encouragement of...
City by city, we'd be very old.
And city by city has been extremely labor intensive from our side, and I'm delighted that you are now setting up a mechanism or contributing to it to establish a tipping point that can take the word out to hundreds of cities rather than just the 5 or 10 that we've been able to work on thus far.
150 cities per year right now.
Okay, if you can do it, great. I'm also impressed that you can work as an NGO in China, which is really doesn't exist. I know.
Separate.
It's very different.
Jennifer Turner classroom discussion.
Yes. So I'm really pleased, and if there's anything we can
I've
do
signed you
further
up
to
already.
interact.
Give me your card.
Okay, will do. As for David, one of the other assignments I have right now is contributing to preparation of a $2 billion loan to Indian Railways to build dedicated freight lines which will carry primarily coal and which will be electric powered. We're really wondering whether this is the right thing for us to be doing, encouraging or aiding and abetting in expansion of India's dirty coal power generation. And I'm wondering whether, given the political differences between the two giants, the lessons that you are learning in China can be replicated in India.
To some extent, I think they can, but I guess when I think about that personally, I think, what is the alternative? And that's really that's the issue. So I'm back to the best thing we can do, I think, is commercialize these technologies just as quickly as we can, the cleaner technologies. I mean, that's my answer.
And how about the feed-in tariff question? Someone.
So, China's working on a draft of a new China energy law. They're looking very seriously at all best practices. So, although it hasn't been put in place yet, I think that when you do see it put in place, they'll make tremendous strides towards that. Yeah.
Okay, and Natalie, we're moving to the next row. Row 2, 3, and 4 are coming down the pike here.
Yes. Jennifer, I'm going to have to bail out.
Jennifer.
Okay. All right. Now, everyone, a round of applause for David real quick. And I don't think I have to do a show of hands. We want him to come back, right? Yeah, he will come back. David, you're stuck with us. And also I want to thank River Lou here from Duke, who got us David. Thanks, River. Okay. She'll be back. Okay. But so we'll get David back because I think we need a longer jiao liao. Okay, your question, sir.
Okay.
It was for David. It's too late.
Partly. But Peggy mentioned that there was this smart grid collaborative. Oh, this is Nitin Pandit from the International Institute for Energy Conservation.
Great.
Peggy mentioned the Smart Grid Collaborative and also something on cold spaces or something that you were doing with Duke. Another collaborative.
Coal? Clean coal?
Oh, is it clean coal? I thought you said coal. But in any case, my question was regarding, are there any technology collaborations that you're seeing in the energy efficiency space? Specifically per se. I know some of that question comes from what Ken was asking on the commercial buildings, but also on the residential side and the housing side where you seem to be doing a lot of work in China.
Mm-hmm. I can also jump. I mean, they're actually. Actually, the China Environment Forum. For my 10 years here, we've had lots of meetings on the energy efficiency side. I mean, just look in the room. We got ICF back there that's got this great pro. He's waving his hand. You go see that man there. Raise your hand down. You two need to talk. They've got an excellent program. Used to be working with EPA's EE buildings, but they're also doing other green building work. There's a lot of green building work, but Natural Resources Defense Council, they're going to come and talk. Barbara Finnemore on the 16th of October. They have created, for over 15 years, a program on energy efficiency, demand-side management, and they notably brought together California and Jiangsu province together to work on these issues. I mean, I think energy efficiency, it's a big area, where they're working, and I think where JUCCCE, they looked for a different niche, because there's a lot of NGOs working in that area, and I'm not saying you're not ignoring energy efficiency, but the focus on smart grid and some of these other, and the mayoral trainings include sometimes energy efficiency, I'm sure.
Yeah, it definitely, energy efficiency is a huge part of what we do. 2/3 of energy is lost between generation use, so therefore we have to focus on energy efficiency. We do it in slightly different ways. Again, our programs, the main criteria is, can we have a major milestone within 3 years or less, right? So things like going into students and talking to them about saving energy, or mayoral training case studies, and really writing up energy efficiency city-level cases for them to take to their cities. Using the media to talk to industry, working with climatecounts.org, which is a nonprofit here. It's a scorecard, climate change scorecard. We're trying to bring that into China, and Broad Air has signed up to be the first Chinese company to be scored. You know, we're doing a lot of things, but it's definitely in slightly different ways than what other NGOs are doing. We're greasing the wheel. So we hope that the Web 2.0 website will allow for all of the energy efficiency best practices and technologies to have a clearinghouse, so that if somebody is looking for some type of solution, they can easily have access to it. So if we can shortcut the time that it takes to get the product, the solution to the buyer, then we're accelerating the greening of China, and that's our job.
One sentence I want to add is that it should note too that, you know, the Energy Foundation has been in China for 10 years, and the research centers and NGOs they support, they're the ones that have created the policies, convinced the central government folks, which basically laid the groundwork for you guys to come in and do what you do. Because you couldn't have come in if NRDC and these folks hadn't been, was it grease the wheels? I like them. All right, moving on down row. Yes, not the palms. And also when you said pushing buttons, I have a 5-year-old. I'm like, no, don't use that thing. Pushing buttons, bad expression. Yes.
Hi, I'm Haibima from Center for Clean Air Policy, and thank you, Peggy. You have a very interesting introduction of the JUCCCE work, and congratulations for all those important works. Actually, we just did a workshop in China in collaboration with Tsinghua University to do a modeling of the China's power sector, trying to help the Chinese government and the industry to develop the then generation plans to meet the future demand. And the preliminary results show that in terms of the new energy like wind power, the problem is not that China doesn't have the capacity or the ability to build more wind power. Sometimes the problem is really embedded within the grids. You know, the lack of this smart grid technology to accommodate those new wind generation powers. Actually, according to my about 30% of the current power generated from the wind plants has been can't get on the grids. That sort of relate to my question. Is as you might have known that NDRC has recently issued a kind of warning message to the provincial and local governments that they have to cool down the development of the wind plants, because this the construction has really been repetitive and overheated. So I wonder if Peggy could tell me that, and the audience, that in your mayor training program, is there any plan of including the efficient way to do this policy making in terms of new energy development, not just to tell them the importance of the new energy development? Is it the way of the decision making over the new energy development?
And setting up the proper standards and mechanisms. That's what kind of was my question too, the CERC's problem, that it's not just technical, it's policy.
The mayoral training program really talks to city level initiatives, and what you're talking about is stuff that happens at a central and utility level. So that's their smart grid cooperative. And right now we're mainly in advisory role, where we're bringing in people like Kima or somebody from Japan, or trying to connect them to the right people who then will write policy advisory notes to the right people. So right now that's what we're trying to do mainly with things like the wind.
Okay, now unfortunately, this is way fun. See, I'm an honorable person. I end on time, start on time as best I can. So I want to thank the speakers. Applause now.